Questions orales. Oral questions. The honourable member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, if an Attorney General receives evidence of illegal activity within the government, he has an obligation to act. I asked the Attorney General this morning in the Justice Committee whether or not he felt he needed to act based upon what was told to him at Cabinet by the former Attorney General. He did not respond. However, the Clerk of the Privy Council has now confirmed for us that the Minister was not present and recused himself from that part of the Cabinet meeting. Can the Minister tell us if the Prime Minister told him to leave the room?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question. As Attorney General for Canada, I am going to defend the principles of Cabinet privilege, Cabinet confidence, as well as solicitor-client privilege. This morning, and you can't, Mr. Speaker, just cherry-pick when it's convenient for you to let that go. So when the question was asked to me this morning, the answer to the question was, Mr. Speaker, that it was covered by Cabinet confidence. I have now been released by Mr. Warnick in his answer, and I can confirm that I left the meeting, I recused myself from the meeting of my own accord.
Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, there were incredibly troubling admissions made at this morning's Justice Committee, so many that I don't have enough time to go through them all, but we're going to fight to do better and make sure we get this on the record. Mr. Speaker, this morning the Clerk of the Privy Council confirmed that he and the Prime Minister sought to influence the decision of the Attorney General in the matter of bribery and fraud charges against SNC-Lavalin. Can the Prime Minister confirm that this indeed is the case?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, we have always respected the work that committees do. That's exactly why we are the government that increased resources at committee. Members from both sides have been asking for witnesses to appear. Committee is doing that important work. We know that last week the Director of Public Prosecution Service confirmed that prosecutors in every case, quote, exercise their discretion independently and free from any political or partisan consideration. Today, the Clerk of the Privy Council also confirmed, quote, at every opportunity, verbally and in writing, in December, the Prime Minister made it clear that this was a decision for the Minister of Justice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Milton.
Speaker, here's the chronology. On September 4th, the final decision was given by the Director of Public Prosecutions. On September 17th, there was a meeting between Jody Wilson-Raybould, the Minister as she then was, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and the Prime Minister, where she asked whether or not she was being directed, and she was told no. After that, Mr. Speaker, there was a meeting on September 18th between SNC-Lavalin and the Clerk of the Privy Council. On December 5th, there was discussions, again, between the former Attorney General and the former private secretary to the Prime Minister. And on December 19th, the Clerk of the Privy Council picked up the phone to pressure the Attorney General in her decision.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as the record shows, the Conservative leader met with representatives of the company. The NDP leader met with representatives of the company. Today, the Conservative deputy leader herself said that, quote, I do not want the impression to be on the record that I think there is anything wrong with meeting with SNC-Lavalin. As the Clerk of the Privy Council confirmed, quote, at every opportunity, verbally and in writing in December, the Prime Minister made it clear that this was the decision for the Minister of Justice to take. We will continue to respect the independence of our judicial system as well as the rule of law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, on September 4th, the Director of Public Prosecutions, after closely reviewing the file, decided to go ahead with a criminal prosecution. Why then, the question is simple, on September 17th, 13 days later, did the Prime Minister choose to meet with his former Attorney General and former Minister of Justice? Why? The Honourable House Leader. Mr. Speaker, it's very important for Canadians to have confidence in their institutions. We know that it's important to let committees do their work. It's our government that increased resources so that committees could do their work. Members on both sides called for witnesses, and today we saw that there were public meetings involving witnesses. Questions were put by members of the committee, and the answers were there for all to see. I think we need to respect the independence of committees and the judiciary. Thank you. The honourable member for Richmond-Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, the question is simple. The day after, September 4th, after the Director of Public Prosecutions had made the decision to go ahead with the criminal trial of SNC-Lavalin, strangely, there were meetings with the company, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of International Trade, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and, strangely, the Prime Minister himself. Now, if the decision had already been made by the Director of Public Prosecutions, then why did the Prime Minister think it would be a good idea to meet with his former Attorney General? The Honourable Government House Leader. Once again, Mr. Speaker, it is very important that Canadians be able to trust their institutions. And here is what we heard at the Justice Committee today. When asked whether it was appropriate for the Prime Minister and his staff to discuss issues with the Attorney General, it was confirmed that that kind of discussion would be appropriate. When asked if conversations with Cabinet colleagues and the Attorney General would be appropriate, he said, absolutely. We respect and we will always respect our institutions. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to cooking up a good political scandal involving getting around the rules to suit cronies, millionaires, and the corrupt, they always deliver. They even provide extended guarantees. After Gerald Butt's resignation, we've now learned that the Attorney General would have suffered inappropriate pressure. Now, if the Prime Minister is afraid of an inquiry, can he at least give the former Attorney General her freedom to speak so that she can tell us her truth? The Honourable Minister of Justice. As I explained before the committee, the issue of solicitor-client privilege is, as the Prime Minister has said, is complex and very layered. Now, we want transparency, Mr. Speaker. We work very, very hard to be able to provide answers, and we would like the former minister to be able to speak. Mr. Speaker, on September 4th, the Director of Criminal Prosecutions decided to go ahead with SNC-Lavalin's trial. 2 weeks later, the Prime Minister met with the former Attorney General to speak about the matter. The next day, lobbyists for the multinational met with the Minister of Finance and the Clerk of the Privy Council. On December 5th, Gerald Butts met with the Attorney General to do exactly what the Prime Minister had done. What was the purpose of these discussions if not to change the mind of the former Attorney General? Is this not a good example of there being one set of rules for people and another set of rules for the Friends of the Liberal Party? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party leader met with the company. The NDP leader met with the party. And today, what was said was that there should be no impression that it is not appropriate to meet with SNC-Lavalin. We, on this side of the House, respect the legal system. We respect the judiciary. We believe that the committee is doing its work, and we think they should do their work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
The ongoing saga of the SNC-Lavalin scandal, Canadians are watching a government melt down in front of our very eyes. According to yet another bombshell report from the Globe and Mail, the former Attorney General told the Cabinet this week that she was improperly pressured to get SNC-Lavalin a sweetheart plea deal in their corruption case. These Liberals promise transparency, but all we see is cover-up. They promise to work for all Canadians, but it's the wealthy and well-connected that always get what they want. With obstruction of justice allegations directed at the Prime Minister's own office, how can Liberals actually stand up and stand in the way of a proper inquiry?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, that it's this government that increased resources for committees to do their important work. That member there was asking to have witnesses appear. Members from both sides got together to ensure that witnesses can appear. We see today that those meetings are taking place in public. We can see that members are asking questions. We can see witnesses are answering questions. I believe we should respect their work. We respect the independence of the judicial system. We will continue to respect officers of Parliament. That's what we do on this side, and the member can choose what he chooses to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
What is she talking about? The Liberals claim this whole thing is about protecting jobs, but we're there for Sears workers. We're there for Avio or Rona or GM workers. If the Liberals actually cared about working people, maybe they could start jailing their corporate friends when they break the law. Instead, Liberals are too busy getting them sweetheart deals. Liberals claim to care about the rule of law, but instead, in their world, there's one set of laws for the wealthy and well-connected, and there's another set for everybody else. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister voted against an inquiry while his former Attorney General properly abstained. Is it the Prime Minister doesn't get conflict of interest, or does he not care?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, that member knows better than most that we have an Officer of Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. They are doing their work. We respect their independence, and we think we should let them do their work. That member talks about Canadians. He talks about the importance of employees. Let's talk about this government's record. We have made strategic investments and seen Canadians bring in 800,000 jobs. They find it funny, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I'm having trouble hearing the answer. We have to hear the questions and the answers, which people don't always like either one, or both sometimes, but we have to hear them nevertheless. The Honourable Government House Leader has the floor for 10 more seconds.
Funny. They find it funny that 300,000 plus children have been lifted out of poverty through the Canada Child Benefit. The Conservatives chose to tax that benefit. We believe that families with children that need the most should get the most. We'll keep fighting for Canadians.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we know and what is undisputed is that subsequent to the September 4th decision that was delivered to SNC-Lavalin, there were numerous meetings after that September 4th decision between the Prime Minister and the former Attorney General, and even between the Privy Council, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and the former Attorney General. We have also heard on numerous occasions through media reports that the former Attorney General felt pressured. We're hearing from the Prime Minister that his description is it wasn't pressure, it was vigorous discussion. Again, we seem to have where the Prime Minister sees things one way, the Attorney General the different ways.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we see the Justice Committee doing their work. We see them bringing forward witnesses and having these conversations. I believe that the committee should be able to do their work independently. Members from all party are present for that work. We are the party that increased resources to committees so that they could do this work. Members from both sides asked for witnesses to appear. They were able to work together to bring forward a list of witnesses. Let's let them do their work, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, here's a simple question we've been asking all day yesterday and today, still haven't gotten an answer. Who called for the meeting between the Prime Minister and the former Attorney General on September 17th? Who asked for that meeting?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I can definitely state that there is obviously a different approach with this Prime Minister and this government than was under the case under the previous government. We have conversations all the time. When it comes to the lives of Canadians and the important decisions we need to make, it's important that we take a whole-of-government approach, and every minister represents them. We work with members on both sides because the voices of their constituents need to be heard. So today at Justice Committee, when it was asked, would it be appropriate for the Prime Minister and officials to discuss the matter with the Attorney General confirmed those kinds of conversations would be appropriate. Talking to each other, Mr. Speaker, communicating, it's important, it's appropriate.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, it's not a question of whether the discussions were appropriate or not. The question is that after the decision on September 4th, there was a meeting on the 17th. We want to know who called for that meeting, the Prime Minister or the former Attorney General. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Justice Committee is doing its work. Witnesses were called. Today, many questions were put to those witnesses. We saw many answers. But it's very important for us to point out that conservatives speak out of both sides of their mouth. They say they don't want the SNC-Lavalin jobs to be harmed. However, what's happening when they speak in English? Well, they say that they're going to, they send the message that there's going to be an end to business with that business. Mr. Speaker, the question is, what did the PM do? Was there undue influence put on the legal system? On the 17th of September, there was a meeting between the PM and the former Attorney General. We want to know who called for that meeting. The Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, members on both sides of the House sit on the Justice Committee. They have an opportunity to ask questions and they get the answers. And everyone can see these discussions. Today, when asked whether or not it was appropriate for the Prime Minister and his staff to have discussions with the Attorney General, today's Attorney General confirmed that that kind of discussion is appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope.
On September 4th, Canada's top prosecutor decided that SNC-Lavalin's case would go to trial. On September 17th, in the presence of the Prime Minister and the Clerk of the Privy Council, the former Attorney General indicated that she would not intervene to try to change the top prosecutor's decision. What followed was an unsolicited and coordinated effort by the Prime Minister and his minions to influence an ongoing legal process, and when the Attorney General didn't cooperate, he fired her. In what world does this interference not constitute a clear attempt to obstruct justice?
Hear, hear. Government House Leader.
On this side of the aisle, the government respects the independence of the work that committees do. We respect the independence of officers of Parliament. We respect the independence of the judicial system. Today we see that the Justice Committee is hearing from witnesses, they are asking tough questions, and they're receiving answers. Just last week, the Director of Public Prosecution Service confirmed that prosecutors in every case, quote, exercise their discretion independently and free from any political or partisan consideration. I think that member on the other side is projecting from his experience under the previous government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope. Order.
The Clerk of the Privy Council confirmed today that months after the former Attorney General had made it clear that she would not interfere in an ongoing court proceeding involving SNC-Lavalin, the Prime Minister refused to accept that decision and continued to pressure the former Attorney General to change her mind. The Director of Public Prosecutions had made a decision. The former Attorney General had made the decision. Why did the Prime Minister then make the decision to try to obstruct justice in an ongoing legal proceeding?
Hear, hear. Honourable Government House Leader.
The member seems to believe that if you raise your voice, all of a sudden there's more validity to what you're saying. Mr. Speaker, the record has stated, I've said, and I'll continue to say, the Justice Committee is doing their work. He can raise his voice louder if he wants to, but the Justice Committee has asked for witnesses to appear. Members have asked questions. Witnesses are answering questions. But it was last week that the Director of Public Prosecution Service confirmed that prosecutors in every case, quote, exercise their discretion independently and free from any political or partisan consideration.
Order. The Honourable Member for Timmins, order. I'd ask the Honourable Opposition House Leader to come to order. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Well, to speak truth to power, a citizen cannot ask anything more for an elected official. And yet when the former Attorney General attempted to speak with her cabinet colleagues about political interference in a justice case, the Prime Minister left her sitting outside his office for 2 hours while he dithered about the optics of letting her into his domain. And in that meeting, she spoke truth to power, and he came out and said he was disappointed in her. Well, Canadians are disappointed in him because she is ready to speak her truth to his power. So what is he so afraid of?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Justice Committee has asked for witnesses to appear. Witnesses will appear. Members from both sides will be able to ask questions. Witnesses will answer those questions. I understand that the former Attorney General has also been asked to come to appear at committee. Members from both sides will be able to ask questions. The former Attorney General will be able to answer them. I'm confident she will. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Timmins, James Bay.
Well, lift the privilege. That's right. I mean, poor Liberals without Jerry Butts to write their lines for them, because yesterday the former Justice Minister stood in this House not once but twice and told her colleagues, every member of this House, that she is being silenced in her ability by this Prime Minister. His treatment of her is not just spiteful. It's not just pusillanimous. This is about the exercise of power and protecting his friends and his insiders, and one woman with integrity is standing in his path. So what's he afraid of? Let her speak her truth, her power to him.
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Speaker, as I said a number of times in this House and before the committee earlier today, the question of privilege, in the words of the former Attorney General, is complex and multi-layered. We are doing our best, Mr. Speaker. The committee is doing its work. We are doing our best, Mr. Speaker, to study that question, to allow the former Attorney General to speak, but we have not yet resolved the issue.
Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton. Order.
The Supreme Court in Krieger stated, quote, "It is a constitutional principle that the Attorney General of this country must act independently of partisan concerns when exercising their delegated sovereign authority to initiate, continue, or terminate prosecutions." In the face of that, what in the world were the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's principal secretary, and the Clerk of the Privy Council doing, talking to the Attorney General to overturn the decision of the public prosecutor?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Government House Leader.
I have to just, it's interesting because I keep saying, but I'm not sure if it's registering with the members opposite, but they have members from their party present at the Justice Committee as well. The Justice Committee is doing really important work. They've been working together to ensure that they can get a list of witnesses to appear so that members can ask tough questions and get these answers. We see that work happening today, and we see important work. And today it was at Justice Committee when asked if it would be appropriate for the Prime Minister and officials to discuss the matter with the Attorney General. The Attorney General confirmed those kinds of conversations would be appropriate.
Member for St. Albert, Edmonton. Order.
Mr. Speaker, it was revealed that at the September 17th meeting, the former Attorney General unequivocally stated that she would not overturn the decision of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And yet, following that, on December 5th, the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, and then on December 19th, the Clerk of the Privy Council himself urged the minister to change her mind. If that is not pressure, then what is?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Clerk of the Privy Council also today at Justice Committee confirmed, quote, "At every opportunity, verbally and in writing, in December, the Prime Minister made it clear that this was the decision for the Minister of Justice to take." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago exactly, the Globe and Mail reported on this new Liberal scandal. And for 2 weeks, what have we seen? Well, we've seen a minister slam the door shut on the cabinet, and we've seen the principal secretary walk out of the room. And yet there are still more layers to this Liberal scandal. We learned that the former Attorney General told the cabinet that she had been put under inappropriate pressure, and that is obstruction of justice. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Justice Committee has members from both sides of the House who work together to call witnesses before the committee. It started today, and we can see that members on both sides are asking questions. The witnesses come to the committee, they answer those questions, and I think that the member opposite should trust at least a little in the committee process. It's our government that increased their resources. We on this side of the House, we respect their work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, Canadians want to be able to trust their institutions, but the problem is that the Liberal government is attacking our institutions. They're interfering in a judicial process. Today in the Globe and Mail, it said that the former Attorney General stated that she had been put under inappropriate pressure. That is an obstruction of justice. How can the government tolerate that? It is absolutely unacceptable. The Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, there's one thing that I do agree on with the member opposite, and that is that it is important that Canadians be able to trust their institutions. We on this side of the House also hold that position, and that's why we respect the independence of the judiciary. We respect the work of committees. That's what they're doing now. We respect the Commissioner's office. He's doing his work, and we will continue to respect their office because we know that Canadians have to be able to trust their institutions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' bill to reduce poverty doesn't go far enough and doesn't do enough. And it's not just my opinion, but that of thousands of organizations and people across the country. They're calling on the government to show leadership and to review their bill so that we can achieve the established objectives. Eliminating poverty isn't a PR campaign. When will the minister listen to these people and finally put forth new concrete measures that will make a real difference in the fight against poverty? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for giving me an opportunity to say clearly that since the first day of our government's mandate, we have focused on the importance of giving all a real, fair opportunity for succeeding in this country, and that is why in 2016 we put in place the Canada Child Benefit that each and every month lifts 300,000 children out of poverty. In April 2019, there was 600,000 Canadians who will be lifted out of poverty thanks to the measures that we have put in place.
For Essex.
Mr. Speaker, it has been 9 months since Trump imposed the destructive tariffs on steel and aluminum, which have forced companies to close shops and workers to lose their jobs. Liberals keep trying to assure Canadians that they have a plan, but the tariffs are still there. This is the same old story. Don't worry, we're working on it and we care about jobs. But after months of witness testimony at the Trade Committee, we now know their plan is a failure to protect communities and jobs, a failure to remove the tariffs. How much more do Canadians need to lose before this Prime Minister will act?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the illegal U.S. tariffs, we've imposed Canada's strongest trade actions ever. Over 40 American groups representing dozens of U.S. industries called for the removal of the U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs, citing the impact of our retaliatory actions. Recently, a senior Republican said that our tariffs are having such an impact that the U.S. must lift their steel tariffs before Congress looks at the new NAFTA deal. Mr. Speaker, our program is working.
Order. I encourage the member for Abbotsford not to interrupt when someone else has the floor. The honourable member for Oakville North Burlington.
Our country is strengthened by its diversity, and members of all communities in Canada must feel safe and be safe. But we know that we are not immune to hate-motivated crimes. Communities across the country, including my riding of Oakville North Burlington, have witnessed these cowardly acts. Can the Minister of Public Safety tell the House what he is doing to help communities at risk of hate-motivated crime improve their security infrastructure?
The Honourable Minister.
Hate are intended to drive wedges of fear and division. Such acts can be a jarring reminder that the inclusive and tolerant Canada that we want is a precious and delicate work in progress that we dare not take for granted. Canadians must be free to practice their faith and culture without fear. To that end, we have doubled federal funding for the Security Infrastructure Program to help pay for security upgrades for communities at risk, and we have significantly broadened access to the program. More new projects will be announced this spring.
Honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decision to go to trial had already been communicated on September 4th. The Prime Minister held a meeting with the former Attorney General on September 17th. At that meeting, the former Attorney General refused to stop the trial. I have a simple question, and I don't need a lesson on the non-answers that we got from the Justice Minister at the Justice Committee. I need to know, why did the Prime Minister, his cabinet, and the Clerk of the Privy Council continue to put pressure on the former Attorney General after the September 17th meeting?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the member can refer to it as he pleases, but the facts will remain that today, at the Justice Committee, the Clerk of the Privy Council confirmed, quote, at every opportunity, verbally and in writing, in December, the Prime Minister made it clear that this was a decision for the Minister of Justice to take. Mr. Speaker, we on this side respect the work of committees. We know that members are asking tough questions. They wanted to have witnesses appear. They have worked together to have those witnesses appear. We will not undermine the work that they are doing, like that member is now choosing to do. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Côte de Beauport, Beaupré. Liberal blah, blah, blah. Now. I would ask honourable members to show respect to others. The honourable member. The Prime Minister tried to stop a legal process. The previous Attorney General said no. So my question is simple. Why did the Prime Minister, his office, and the Clerk of the Privy Council continue to interfere in this file following the meeting of September 17th? Why? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, I believe that it is clear that there is not much respect for our institutions by the Conservatives. On this side of the House, we respect the committees, we respect the independence of the legal system. We will continue to work with them. That is why we increased resources for committees so that they can do their important work. We respect our institutions, and we know that that is important. It's important for Canadians to have confidence in their institutions. Thank you.
The former Attorney General told Cabinet this week, according to the Globe and Mail, that she faced inappropriate pressure to interfere with the trial into the criminal charges against SNC-Lavalin. Section 139(1) of the Criminal Code makes it an indictable offense punishable by up to 2 years in prison to obstruct the course of justice in a judicial proceeding. Wow. Has any member of the Cabinet who bore witness to the former Attorney General's remarks this week passed them along to the RCMP for investigation?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Let's see just what we heard at the Justice Committee this morning. When asked if it would be appropriate for the Prime Minister and officials to discuss the matter with the Attorney General confirmed, quote, those kinds of conversations would be appropriate. When asked about conversations with the Cabinet colleagues in his role as Minister of Justice and the Attorney General and whether they were appropriate, the Attorney General answered, absolutely. We always have and we always will, on this side of the aisle, respect our institutions.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, now she's quoting a politician about an incident that he just admitted he didn't witness. Why not get back to the people who did witness her? Yeah. The former Attorney General told Cabinet this week, according to the Globe and Mail, that she faced inappropriate pressure to interfere with the criminal trial of SNC-Lavalin. If that happened, it may have violated sections of the Criminal Code. My question is, did anyone in the Cabinet refer her allegations to the RCMP for investigation?
Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I responded 2 days ago, we have no knowledge of any such activity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, a coalition of organizations representing Canada's retirees was on the Hill yesterday to urge the Liberal government to protect the workers' pensions in case of corporate insolvency. They also called on this government to create a national pension insurance plan and to change federal insolvency legislation to give workers pension priority status. The NDP unequivocally supports these initiatives and have been asking the minister over and over to ensure pension security. Will the Liberals finally listen to Canadian workers and retirees and protect their pensions, yes or no?
Seniors.
I'd like to thank Jan for his work on this file. Pension security is very important to our government. We made a commitment in the 2018 budget, as well as in my mandate letter, to consult with Canadians, and that's exactly what we've done. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all those that have submitted contributions to this consultation process. Our government wants an evidence-based solution to this issue, and so to do that, we are going to take a look at what we have has been submitted and come up with an evidence-based solution. We don't want a Band-Aid solution with unintended consequences. We want the right solution, and that's what we're going to deliver.
Honourable Member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, Sports Canada's policy to prevent harassment and abuse in sport hasn't been effective. Each week brings new headlines detailing old or new abuses that have come to light. Athletes and sports organizations are calling on this minister to establish an independent body able to investigate abuse and harassment. Instead of listening, she announced yet another code of conduct. Will this minister stop stalling and establish an independent investigative body for abuse allegations in all sports?
Minister of Science and Sport.
Mr. Speaker, I am heartbroken for all the athletes who have suffered. Let me be clear, there is zero tolerance for abuse, discrimination, or harassment of any kind in sport. That's why last June we introduced strong measures to end abuse, discrimination, and harassment in sport. And last week, for the first time in our country's history, a declaration was signed by all sport ministers from coast to coast to coast. The Red Deer Declaration will drive a systemic culture shift to prevent abuse, discrimination, and harassment in sport.
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the Prime Minister met with the former Attorney General on September 17th. We also now know that the Clerk of the Privy Council was present at that meeting and that there was discussion of a matter before the court. A simple question, Mr. Speaker, that may one day well be asked in court. Does the Prime Minister still challenge the former Attorney General's belief that this was an attempt to improperly influence her?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Let's look at the record, Mr. Speaker. Just last week, the Director of Public Prosecution Service confirmed that prosecutors in every case, quote, exercise their discretion independently and free from any political or partisan consideration. Mr. Speaker, earlier today, the Deputy Minister of Justice confirmed that, quote, there is no direct communication in any specific case between the PMO and the DPP. Today, at Justice Committee, the Clerk of the Privy Council also confirmed that, quote, at every opportunity, verbally and in writing, in December, the Prime Minister made it clear that this was the decision for the Minister of Justice to take. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to know what happened at committee this morning. Here's my question. On September 4th, the Director of Public Prosecutions informed SNC-Lavalin that they would be going to trial. On September 17th, the former Attorney General told the Prime Minister and the Clerk of the Privy Council that she would not change her director's decision. The case should have been closed. Why would the clerk? The PMO? And, above all, why would the Prime Minister himself insist that the Attorney General of Canada change her decision? The Government House Leader. The Director of Public Prosecutions exercises the discretionary power independently. The Deputy Minister of Justice confirmed that there was no direct communication in no specific case between the PMO and the DPP. It was also confirmed that at each opportunity, the Prime Minister said that it was a decision to be made by the Minister of Justice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Central Okanagan, Smilkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, it is now very clear that this Prime Minister cannot be trusted. We know now that he met with the former Attorney General after the independent prosecutor decided to proceed with the trial. We also know that the former Attorney General told the Prime Minister and his office that she would not intervene. It should have ended there, Mr. Speaker, but it didn't. That's right. Can the Prime Minister tell us why on earth would he and his government embark on an unsolicited, coordinated, and sustained effort to change her position? How is this not political interference?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadians should have confidence in their institutions. We know that Liberal members have confidence in the independence of the judicial system, the work that committee is doing. We have confidence in the officers of Parliament. We know that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is investigating this matter. We also know that the Justice Committee is looking into this matter. They have been working very hard, members from both sides, to call in witnesses. They are asking challenging questions. They are receiving answers, Mr. Speaker. I think we should let them do their important work. We have confidence in committees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Yukon. Order.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Government of Canada tabled Canada's first Indigenous languages bill. This is a historic step in rebuilding Canada's relationship with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples as we continue the dialogue on reconciliation. Can the Minister of Canadian Heritage and Multiculturalism please explain to this House how this bill will help Indigenous peoples defend their language rights and ensure that Indigenous languages are transmitted to future generations? Masi Joe.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Yukon for his amazing work. Yes. Our language is who we are. It's how we tell our stories to our children. Most Indigenous languages are in danger. So many have been lost. So we need to act. We need to act now, hand in hand with Indigenous people. Et j'espère que tous les partis.
And I hope that all parties will join the Indigenous peoples in order to adopt this legislation that acknowledges the linguist right as of Indigenous people, and it responds to calls to action 13, 14, and 15 to provide long-term funding.
Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
The Independent Director of Public Prosecutions made a decision to proceed to trial on a case of corporate criminal corruption. Then the former Attorney General decided to let the decision stand. Then the Prime Minister, his cabinet, and Michael Wernick tried to get her to change her mind. She didn't. Then she was fired. Oh. Does the Prime Minister understand that neither him nor Michael Wernick get to define what constitutes inappropriate pressure?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, Justice Committee members have asked for witnesses to appear. They are appearing. I have confidence in members on both sides to ask tough questions. They will receive the answers that they are looking for. Just last week, the Director of the Public Prosecution Service confirmed that prosecutors in every case exercise their discretion independently and free from any political or partisan consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Speaker, we learned from this morning's PBO report that the Liberals misled veterans with their new pension for life, which is actually less generous for the most seriously injured veterans. And worse, throughout this whole SNC-Lavalin scandal, veterans are losing out because the Prime Minister has yet to appoint a Veterans Affairs Minister. The revolving door of Liberal and Conservative ministers is disrespectful. 8 ministers in 9 years. Wow. It's heartbreaking to see veterans sacrifice their lives while consecutive governments won't properly invest in services that veterans deserve. So why are the Liberals leaving veterans out in the cold?
Yeah. Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I stand here very proud to be the acting Minister of Veterans Affairs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to ensuring that our veterans receive the benefits and support that they deserve. The needs of Canada's veterans have changed significantly over the past 100 years, and when the Pension Act was introduced, and our support needs to change as well. Thanks to our government's $10 billion additional investment, Mr. Speaker, all veterans today, including the most vulnerable, are better off than when they're under the previous Harper government, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Mr. Speaker,
order.
Canadian highways play a key role in our economy forward. In fact, they are vital to rural and remote communities specifically. Good conditions of these roads allows Canadians and goods to move more efficiently across the country and help our economy continue to grow. This is particularly crucial in my home province of Manitoba, as trade is an important part of our diversified economy. Can the Minister of Rural Economic Development update this House on what investments are being made for the highway network of Manitoba?
Honourable Minister. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I'd like to thank my colleague, the member for St. James Charles Assiniboia, for his question and for his hard work.
Modern, safe and efficient highways play a crucial role in the economy of Canada. This is why we've announced over $140 million for 8 highways to help Manitobans, businesses to improve competitive and improve the commutes for Canadians. This is an important investment and the kind of investments that will continue to make Canada prosper. Merci, Mr.
President. Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, after listening to the interactions today, I have one simple question for the Justice Minister, and I'd like the Attorney General to offer a legal opinion on behalf of Canadians. And that question is, can cabinet confidentiality be used to cover up criminal actions?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as Attorney General for Canada, I will not answer a legal question, give a legal opinion on the floor of the House of Commons.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the Act gives the Attorney General to conclude remediation agreements. A remediation agreement with SNC-Lavalin would enable taxpayers to recover hundreds of millions of dollars, and it could save thousands of jobs in Quebec and Canada. We know that the minister can take action. We'd just like to know why he has not done so. Why jeopardize the thousands of jobs in Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable colleague for his question. He asked a question at committee today. The answer is the same. As Attorney General of Canada, I cannot speak to the matter because it could have an impact on the dispute that is currently before the court. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, for 2 weeks now, the government's been getting bogged down in its versions, secrets, resignations, and half-truths. We don't know why the Minister of Veterans Affairs resigned. We don't know why the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister resigned. And if the Attorney General can reach an agreement with SNC-Lavalin, but didn't do so, well, we don't know why he didn't do that either. There are thousands of jobs at stake in Quebec. Why isn't there a remediation agreement? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, you must all understand that as Attorney General for Canada, it is my role to protect the institutions, legal institutions in Canada, and that is what I will do. It's a priority, an absolute priority for me as Attorney General. Secrecy is important when it comes to these issues, and I would not want to have any sort of influence over a matter that is before the courts.
Violence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was certainly welcome news more than a year ago when this government announced that we would have a Canadian ombudsperson for responsible enterprise. For too long, Canadians have been horrified by human rights abuses at the hands of Canadian mining companies, actions overseas that bring shame to this country. But the Canadian ombudsperson for responsible enterprise is supposed to be a lead, a model for the world. It's a year later. Where is it?
Honourable Minister of International Trade and Diversification.
It's very important to our government that Canadian companies around the world respect human rights and are operating at the highest possible ethical standards. We are moving forward with appointing the first ever ombudsperson for corporate social responsibility to help reflect our core values in the world and to deliver on our trade agenda. The ombudsperson will work to ensure that Canadian firms operating abroad exercise leadership in ethical, social, and environmental practices. The appointment will be announced soon.